On this week's episode, me and Jesse handle a lot of the basics that we recommend on these trucks. It involves the 5-inch catback exhaust system and S&B cold air intake. We handle some of the transmission issues with that 48RE, and then we also get an Edge Insight installed so we can monitor what's going on. All of this is getting done before we tune the truck. Stay tuned. Okay, so we've got our MBRP kit taken apart here out of the box and everything. We went with a 5-inch aluminized option catback, obviously. Nice thing about these MBRP kits is they come with these band clamps that integrate the hanger into the nut, so as you cinch it down, it actually tightens the hanger onto the clamp itself. We went the aluminized option because we are trying to stay on budget with this. I've also got our MBRP muffler here, which it looks like has taken a spill over shipping, but nothing that a crescent wrench can't fix. Got our welded on hanger here. Goes into the stock location, everything else, and yeah, should give us a little bit more aggressive sound and hopefully some better performance out of it. So we got the truck up in the air, got the stock exhaust off. Me and Jesse are going to start throwing this on. Give it a twisty. There you go.
Everybody fall down once. Yeah, every lugger fall down once.
Ah,
yeah, everybody
found
fall
it.
down once. Yeah, every lugger fall down once. Hold it when it come. It ain't gonna stay when it drop it when it fall down. Pick that up. Hold it when it come. It ain't gonna stay when it drop it
here we go.
fall down. Pick that up. Sick of love slipping through fingertips.
All right, so we've got our 5-inch MBRP catback system with muffler on the truck ready to go. Install was fairly easy. Did you run into sort of issues, Jesse?
No issues as far as the quality of the system or anything. It was more just getting everything lined up at the same time with a hanger and a clamp, and the way the hanger slips onto the clamp over the bolt, so you're kind of trying to get everything together and then it might fall apart. So we ended up taking it out, putting a couple of the pieces together on the table, which made it a lot easier, slid it back up in the truck. Everything's tight. Fitment was great. It's not running into anything. It's not going to heat up and burn a brake line. It's all in there. It's not moving around. It's a great setup.
Really excited to hear how that sounds once we get it back on the ground. Right. Now we're going to get this thing dropped and start working on our S&B intake. One of the things we did notice when we got the truck in is it does have an aftermarket intake on there. We're not sure whose it is, but it's also just like an open element intake.
And the element itself, the rubber is deteriorated on it. It's starting to crack. You know, it probably need to be cleaned anyways. It's probably, put on in the late 2000s, so it's time for a new setup.
Yeah, so luckily we've got this option here from S&B. They're our go-to just about every time when it comes to an intake for this truck. As we were talking before, this is a non-baffled intake tube, so we're going to make sure we keep that nice turbo noise out of the truck. I've also got this very convenient plexiglass top on here, so we can always check and make sure our filter is clean. We did opt to go with the oiled reusable option. That way we can service it later on and make sure we can keep a nice happy truck for a long time. Install should be pretty straightforward, pretty easy, and just in case, S&B does include full color instructions. So we should be good to go.
All right, let's knock it out.
Let's make it happen. Intake to remove an intake. So one thing you may notice about this compared to the other intake that we just took off is it is a sealed intake system, which means it's only going to be pulling air from the outside of the engine. Now the intake that was on here before, it looked like it did at one point have a cover on there, but it wasn't actually sealed. It was still pulling in warm air from the engine. But with this option from S&B, or actually from all S&B intakes, they are going to be pulling nice cool air from outside of the engine bay, making sure that you're getting good proper airflow for your turbo to make a good boost and good noises. The last time I installed an S&B intake, the only downside I had to say was the grommets around the bolts for the clear plastic thing, or the clear plastic top, they just kind of like squished out. They now have these trick little plastic washers that go in there that make it super clean, and that way you won't crack the lid either. So I'm pretty stoked on that. Good thing, cheers for them for always innovating. Only thing we have left to do really is we're gonna throw a zip tie on this line right here by the mass airflow sensor, and then we should be good to go. All right, so we've got the exhaust on the truck and the intake installed. Now it's time to work on monitoring. For monitoring what we have going on with this truck, it was a very simple choice. We're going with the Edge Insight CTS3, nice new color touchscreen monitor. For mounting, which is pretty cool, we've actually got a MOPAR pillar, which we have listed on the website. It's got a MOPAR part number and everything like that, with the grab handle and a single gauge hole, which would normally be for like a boost gauge on an SRT8 or something like that. However, what we're using it for is going to be the Edge Insight. That way it's a nice clean factory install. And you may be thinking to yourself, this hole, square peg, not so much.
The semicircle.
That's right, it's the square hole.
Well, luckily Edge has thought of that. They actually make an adapter which will go into that 2 1/16 gauge hole and come off and allow us to mount the Insight right there. It keeps things looking nice and clean. The other, you may see a whole cornucopia of wires here. We've got our OBD2 port slitter. That way we can keep the Edge Insight plugged in along with our tuner. Lastly, you also see the pyrometer probe right here. We're actually getting ready to drill and tap our hole in the exhaust manifold, which is going to be a 1/8 inch NPT hole. That way we can put this probe in there and measure the exhaust gas temperatures and then plug that into the screen. That way we can monitor it there. So this needs to go to Jesse and onto the truck.
All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna drill a hole in the top of the exhaust manifold in between cylinders 3 and 4 with a 21/64 bit, and then use an 1/8 inch National Pipe Thread tap.
Give it a little tappy. Tap, tap, tap-a-roo.
To tap our hole down in there. Now what we're gonna do is coat both our drill bit and our tap with a good coating of grease to trap any metal shavings that would drop down into the manifold that would then go into the turbocharger and create mayhem. So we're gonna get started with that right now.
Now that we've got the hole drilled and tapped in the manifold for the pyrometer probe, it's time to get it wired up. Jesse's getting that in right now. This is the first piece of wiring to go basically from the sensor into the Edge expandable accessory system. And you'll see how that kind of all snaps together, but this is gonna be, we're gonna try and get this nice and tucked out of the way, away from the heat, and then run it along the top of the, like where the wipers are, to kind of keep it out of the way and then fish it into the cab. So we do need to get one cable going from the cab into the engine bay to connect to the exhaust gas temperature probe. We do have where the clutch pedal would have gone through if it was a manual, but obviously we got some other wires going through there for the stereo system. So there is another grommet hole where the brake controller, because this thing does have, in the previous one, we did put a brake controller on there, which we're going to just make a little bit bigger, and then we should be able to fish our wire through there. That way we can read what's in the engine bay on the inside. Nice, I like it. We'll get you a better shot of this, but since it is a factory part, it matches the interior perfectly. It's the same exact color as the filter we took off. You still get your grab handle. Yeah, I dig it, and that keeps the Edge actually a really nice position right there. We just got to make sure that it's not going to touch the dashboard just because of road vibration, but otherwise, that should be pretty straightforward. I dig it. All right, it is time for training work on the 07. So to do that, since we do need to service the transmission anyways, we are dropping the fluid. We are going to be replacing the pan with this option from BD here. It's a deep sump pan. Nice thing, comes with hardware. Also it's a drain plug, so later on down the road, if you ever do need to drain and fill your transmission, got a transmission drain plug there, which makes it nice and easy. It's also got a sensor port, so if you are running, say like an Edge Insight or some other gauges that need to have a sensor into the transmission pan to read transmission fluid temperature, bam, there it is, already pre-tapped, ready to go. As well as inside the transmission to help take care of some pretty known troublesome issues. We are doing an ATS, governor pressure solenoid conversion block. It's a mouthful, I know. But what this will do is essentially get rid of the stock governor pressure solenoid, which is a common failure point, and replace it with a larger one, actually a GM one, which requires this conversion block from ATS. Next, we are going to be replacing the transducer, which will be this guy right here. The factory one is plastic and is also prone to failure, so we're going to be replacing that with a BD transducer upgrade. The BD pan also comes with a reusable gasket and hardware, and then of course we are going to be topping it all off with Schaefer's all trans fluid. which should help this thing shift pretty well once we start adding a little bit more power to it. And then later on down the line, when we do a full transmission on there, it will also be getting chafers as well. So let's get to it. Yeah, this whole pan is still full, so it's like all the way up to there still. So, slow and steady.
You're gonna pull that stupid thing off, right?
Yeah, so I gotta take the, should be 4 bolts holding that thing down. One connection here, one connection there, that whole thing comes off. Cool. All right, so we've got our stock pressure solenoid out with the block that goes along with it and the stock transducer. And we've got our ATS pressure, governor pressure solenoid conversion block with the new governor pressure solenoid there. And we've also got the BD transducer in there. One thing you will notice if you're installing this, if you're putting a stock transducer back in, you're going to be reusing this retaining clip. However, if you're doing what we're doing and adding the BD transducer in there, it actually has a clip that goes inside and retains that in there, which means you will no longer be using this outside retention right here. It's actually going to hold itself in there with that clip. So make sure you lube the O-ring when you put it in, and we are going to use the supplied gasket that came with it, just like that. Put this bad boy back on. Okay, so what we've got on the display here, we've got battery voltage. Yes, the display does have a battery gauge on there. However, I do like being able to actually watch the voltage. I think it reacts a bit faster than this one does. We've got transmission fluid temperature. We've got engine coolant temperature, corrected speed. As you notice, we put the original tire size in and the new tire size in. Not too far off, but enough to where having corrected speed is never a bad idea. Dead center, because in my opinion, it's probably one of the most important things to watch. We've got the EGTs. Right beside that, we've got boost. Those two things together can usually give you a really good indication of what your truck is doing and how it's running. Next, in the top right-hand corner, we've got run time. They're a bad idea. I would say it's not necessarily something that's super important, but it's a good idea. We just clicked over 1 minute since I put that pit on there. Below there, we've got fuel rail pressure. So that's going to be the pressure of the fuel in the fuel rail distributing to the injectors. We've also got intake air temperature, and we've got the throttle position. So as I press the throttle, you can see that changes. I'd say the throttle position percentage on there is probably something that a lot of people overlook, but when you're trying to see what's happening, if you're trying to diagnose something going on with the truck, seeing where your throttle is at in comparison to a lot of other things can give you a really good idea of, you know, when something pops up that could be an issue. So I think right now it is time to get the door open. We're going to back this thing out, check transmission fluid one more time, just because we did change that. We want to make sure we're topped off. And then I think me and Jesse are going to take this for a rip before we put a tune on it, bring it back in, throw a tune on it, and take it off another rip and see how much fun it is. Things are shifting the way they're supposed to. Well, that's everything she got.
Pretty good for a big old heavy truck.
Yeah, for a big old heavy truck with a stock tune, I think you and I both are in the same boat. You know, it does what it's supposed to do. It shifts. I will say the shifts do seem a little crisper, given the transmission is still in good shape.
Yeah.
And we haven't thrown any extra power at it. You know, there's probably not going to be a huge difference in anything there, but I will say the shifts do feel a bit more crisp.
Yeah, and that's something that you're gonna notice more on your personal truck that you daily drive. You know, if you threw somebody in the truck before we did the upgrade and then just threw them in after, they're probably not going to notice it. But
no.
That's with anything, with your personal vehicle. You know every noise, you know every little rattle, and you know every shift point on the truck if you've driven it for 50,000 miles.
Yeah. I think we'll probably notice a little bit the transmission work will shine once we throw the tune on there.
Yeah.
Because once we start throwing a little bit of extra power at it, if the stock parts were not working correctly and they were not providing enough pressure to hold lockup, then yeah, we were going to start seeing some slippage. So I think it was a good move to do that ahead of time.
Oh yeah.
I will say the edge inside, the new finish that they have on the screen, especially with it being flush, like there's no raised ridge.
Yeah.
I like it. It's a very, like, the CTS2 is obviously a nice update over the original CTS, no question about that. And to me, honestly, it's still, I'd say it still is relatively relevant for like a car monitor. But this, like, I'm not trying to like blow this thing out of the water here, but this is I feel like it's a very nice updated device.
Yeah.
That's a good shift. Yeah, that was basically, I think just off the line it went full, and it felt good.
I mean, really, this is like, as far as stock trucks go, this is like the truck that won everybody over, in my opinion, on the Cummins diesel. Like, really, everybody looks back on the 12-valve trucks with fondness and everything, but they were, I mean, they were still an old truck.
Yeah.
But these are really what solidified the Cummins powered Dodges into the greatness that they are.
Especially with the tuning capability.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, with that right there, once we're gonna do some smarty tuning on there. I think of either a 60 or a 90 horsepower tune, and I think this is gonna be an entirely different truck.
Oh yeah, it's really gonna wake up.
So one of the things I do want to make sure that we watch once we tune this thing is we are still running the stock lift pump on this. And there's lots of arguments as far as like how much a stock lift pump can support, what kind of pressure it's supposed to be putting out, blah, blah, blah. I will say the stock lift pump on the common rail 5.9s is not quite as bad as you would see on like the VP44 trucks. And also the CP3 is not quite as sensitive as the VP44 is to cavitation or low fuel rail pressure, or low fuel pressure, so on and so forth. So I am interested to see, and I think that's one of the reasons why I am kind of leaning towards just a 60 horsepower tune. But honestly, curiosity is probably going to get the best of me. But watching the rail pressure, because once we start leaning on it and really kind of stretching its legs, at a 90 horsepower tune, we may end up seeing on the top end that rail pressure start to drop. And since we don't have a fuel pressure gauge on the lift pump itself, that's basically an indication that we are starting to lose, we're just not getting fuel from the tank to the engine fast enough. So, I mean, that is in the works. We are doing a lift pump on the truck once we start doing more power modifications. Shoot, if we end up needing to later, before we do the other stuff, we may end up putting that in there. But as of right now, since we haven't put it in there, that's kind of what we're working with. So it'll be fun to kind of watch that rail pressure and see what happens. We also don't have a pressure relief valve block off in here. So if the stock rail pressure sensor, if the stock pressure relief valve is bleeding off too early or is worn out, we may also start seeing fuel cuts at the top end. But I think with like a 60 or 90 horsepower tune, we should be within that working range. And honestly, if we put it at the 90 and we start seeing cutouts, we'll just back it down to the 60, and more than likely we should be still in the green. So let's throw a tune on this thing.
Perfect, let's do it.